everyone. Welcome back to Morning Call. I'm Alyce.
And I'm Crystal. And today we're going to be talking about how movement has helped us move through our grief and process our grief. Alyce, what, in a broader sense, there's different types of movement, but what has movement meant to you as you've processed through your grief journey?
Yeah, so, movement has always played a big role in my life, growing up as a dancer, and specifically in the context to experiencing, this deep loss and learning to move with my own grief. I've been able to break down and separate kind of 5 different forms of movement, right? In the past, obviously you hear the word movement and, I definitely associated more to just physical movement. And what I've gotten clear on in this process is that there are 5 types of movement, right? So we have the physical movement, we have mental movement, we have emotional movement, we have spiritual movement, and we have energetic movement. Yeah, and in those, I think they're all interconnected. And what a big part of my process has been is clarifying these different practices that contribute to how I'm moving in the world, how I'm showing up in the world, how I'm processing and navigating and really truly moving with my experience of loss and these different waves that, 3 years later, it hit me like a ton of bricks.
Oh, yeah.
Right. And so I've been able to identify different practices outside of just my physical practices, to restore myself. Right. And sometimes that means like taking a personal day, right? Being still. So with these 5 forms of movement that I have been able to identify for myself, I've really gotten clear with the different types of practices that go along with each form of movement. Crystal, do you want to talk to us about some of the ways in which you practice these movements for yourself as you move through grief?
Yes, absolutely. First off, I'll agree with one thing that you said, that, maybe kind of in a former life or maybe pre-grief, or, things are fluid, right? It's not just linear, but that you viewed movement as just the physical and kind of didn't really, not acknowledge, but, didn't think of movement in these other capacities. So similarly, I think I approached it the same. Like I was like, okay, physical movement. I didn't really think about how emotions move through me, or spiritually or energetically. And I think that has become much clearer since losing my dad. Just like you, I've had a yoga practice since 2009, and it was kind of already starting to shift from just like the physical asanas to also like a spiritual practice, a mental practice. Like it was already happening, but I really kind of dove deep into those elements of my yoga practice since losing my dad. It became more of like a moving meditation, which we can get into more later because I'd be curious to hear how your yoga practice has changed. And then speaking of meditation, I think that has become a emotional and spiritual movement practice for me. I'm sitting still, but my thoughts are moving. I can feel my energy moving through me as I'm focused on whatever the meditation is focused on. I agree with you that I think, prayer and meditation are different, but also can be similar. I've always been a person that prays, but I think my meditation has also kind of like started to intertwine with my prayer life. As I process my grief. Does that make sense? I'm not sure if I'm
absolutely
making sense. I really didn't start a meditation practice until after my dad died. So he passed in 2017 and I started in 2019. And now it's like I have kind of 20 to 30 minutes every morning of sitting still. I do meditation. I do kind of a gratitude practice. So it's, grateful energy moving through me, thoughts moving through me. So that alone, even though I'm sitting still, is a movement practice. I don't know if you agree with that or if you have any thoughts around that as well.
Absolutely. I think what's coming up for me is I remember in a teacher training, and I should have my list in front of me for this conversation, but like there's 5 forms of prayer, right? And so like, and essentially it's like, the spoken word, the written word, the meditative, there is the physical act of prayer, right? So it's like, as much as I've categorized these things out, right, to kind of make sense for them in my head, they're all intertwined, right? And sometimes, especially after my mom passed, like, the physical practice I was terrified of, because I knew in those practices I would feel so much. And I think I did a lot to avoid that for a good, and I just wasn't ready. I wasn't like, and in the process too of experiencing my mother's passing and transition, in the physical act of it, I had such spiritual experiences in comprehending what was happening to my mom's body, right? Like, yeah, there was like, and like I couldn't make sense of it at the time, and I could feel
and this
it
was like during your practice, like during a yoga.
During the process of her exiting this earthly life, and it was just, and it became this. And I don't want to say like I was looking. I knew I wasn't looking for the why, right? Like I wasn't asking why this was happening. There was just something in me that allowed, like, I was like, it was an acceptance. It was just like an automatic acceptance of like what was happening, and the power of that. And I want to stay connected to trusting, this process, or trusting, my belief in a higher source, or like, and because I also don't feel like, we don't talk about, the parallels that I have is like childbirth compared to death is very, like, the parallels are, it's just so like similar. It runs parallel.
Well, and the veil, it's like the veil between this life and that life is open during those two things, during birth and death.
Right.
Like,
and like, so yes, that veil is open.
Yeah.
Exactly. And, it's just it's as magnificently traumatizing as it is a miracle. Right. And so like, here I am, listening to my mother. It sounds like she's choking, right? And her lungs, like the physical act is like her lungs are filling up with fluid, her body is shutting down, right? And I'm also in my head like, this isn't painful. It can't be painful. Why would God do this? Why would this exit of life be painful for someone who has lived such a good life, right? And so it's like,
well, and our bodies know how to die, in theory.
Yes, absolutely. And but we don't talk about that, as much as it's like, I went to a birthing class and they talked about contractions, and no one in my family had ever had a vaginal delivery before me. So I didn't talk to my mom or my sister about the possibilities. And when they said, you're 10 centimeters dilated, let's go, I like had a bit of a moment of like, shit, I didn't practice breathing. I didn't anticipate this happening, even though I didn't have a birth plan. Like, unconsciously, my sister had C-sections, my mom had C-sections. I was going to have C-sections, it just,
right. Yeah.
So like this conversation of like truly understanding that anything can happen, right? And like trusting this process, I think goes back to like having these practices in place where like my yoga practice wasn't fully like as consistent as it is now when I was pregnant with Amelia. And, and what I did have was my years of training that like taught me really how to breathe through pain, right?
Yeah.
And trust my body, right? Like that was like the moment when I delivered Amelia was like the most connected I've ever felt with my body.
That's beautiful.
Anywhere, and I can say the same for when I had that experience, like, when my mom was transitioning, of like, there were things that my sister did that I could not do. And there are things that I did that my sister could not do or my dad could not do, and it's like there was just such a seamless act of like trusting ourselves, our thoughts, our spiritual and emotional and mental energy that was happening, that we were able to like truly be there with each other.
Do you, I have like a couple of questions that have come up
Yeah.
as you've been talking. So one is the spiritual energy, because I do believe, like we talked about, like during birth and death, the veil is very thin between this world and whatever is beyond this world, this physical world. Do you feel as if, I mean, there's no right answer, like you felt more spiritually? I mean, watching your mother transition is very difficult. And did you feel like a sense of spiritual connectedness, like in the process? Like there was more spiritual energy around you, not even just like in the room, but like in your life at that time. Does that make sense what I'm asking?
Absolutely. Yes. I think my first real experience was in childbirth, and like, and that like literally the creation of life, and like not watching, but experiencing another human being come out of my body.
Yeah. I have chills, like even just you talking about it, like a whole nother soul like comes into this world, like guns a-blazing.
Yes.
And you're like, oh my God, there's a whole nother life force in this room that wasn't here before, like it's crazy.
Before, yes. Yeah. And you're responsible for it. Like you created it, you literally birthed it, and now, and not responsible in an act of like, oh, now this is my job, and like, it's just, you're just like, it's an awe moment. Like that's the only way I know how to describe it. And similarly, it's like, my mom had these moments where she was like, where are the two women in the room? And we were like, oh, it's, Mom, it's just been Aaron and myself, my sister and I. And she was like, no, they were right there. And it's like, it's almost as she started describing one of her sisters and her mom that had passed before her. And, and similarly, like the whole time, like just this whole time I started playing music. I like put a list together of like her and my dad's favorite songs, and had emailed her younger sister and was like, what were some of Mom's favorite songs? And so there were like moments where she would start humming to the music, and it was just ways that like these little ways that she was communicating, and energetically, like especially after she passed, like I remember feeling like I completely broke down, and but yet I felt so held, and I felt warm, and I was like, oh, like I was done. I curled up on the couch with my partner Hudson and fell asleep for a while, and then it was as if it was when they were taking her body out of the home, out of my parents' home, and it's like her spirit left, and I just felt that. I don't know if anyone else felt that, but like I woke up and I was like, oh, I need to do X, Y, and Z, and I need to check on my sister and my dad, and like, I went back to kind of being a human again, like, put one foot in front of the other. And it's definitely been something that I have become more curious. And I think that moves me into like, this process of like energy, of like how we share energy, and like the energy. My mom received lymphatic massages from a friend of ours from Yoga One, and she came and taught me how to do it. And I just remember watching even the gentle touch of like, moving. I'm like trying to show like moving the energy and the fluid in her body helped her be like create this sense of clarity where she was able to really form thoughts to communicate with me.
Interesting. Yeah.
And those have become my own practices that I'm like, okay, that I still tap into to this day, because it's like, I truly, I believe that, we receive messages. Like even before my mom passed, I believed, I've experienced an intense amount of loss. Not intense, a great amount of loss. Like my grandparents, my mom's older brother and sister, aunts and uncles, the list goes on. And so, I believe in signs, like seeing cardinals.
Absolutely.
Like I've always associated that with like my grandfather, hummingbirds with my grandmother, and even more so, like I'm more heightened and aware of receiving those and looking for those signs. And I think
that's a spiritual energy in itself,
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I think that's like part of my practice of like keeping that like more at the forefront of my practices, of like being open to receiving, not just in animals now it's in scents, now it's in sounds, now, it's like, really allowing us, because our souls are here, and they're like right now, like my soul is within this vessel, like my physical body. And I do believe that they don't go away,
right?
After the fact, that they're like, yeah.
I mean, it's
what
like
are your
matter.
thoughts?
Well, I was going to say the concept of like matter cannot be either created or destroyed. Like our souls, our energy, it's a type of matter. It's a type of energy, is still something. So yeah, I agree that it goes like we come from somewhere and we go somewhere, like you're talking about birth, like that soul that energy is coming from somewhere and coming into this like physical realm, and then it goes somewhere else once we're out of this physical realm.
Right. Stardust.
Yeah. I mean, I think we could talk about a whole episode of signs, because similarly, well, I was going to say, I believe that if you're people that are open to receiving that, not just signs, but like spiritual, whether it's like links from the universe, God, whatever you want to call it, like it doesn't have to be just from a loved one that's passed. But I think you have to be, like you said, you have to be open and receptive to receiving that type of energy. I think some people it might like scare, and they kind of close themselves off and they don't want to receive it. And therefore I believe they're not going to receive it. Like you have to be open to, I mean, they might still receive it, but they might say, oh, like they'll say it's something else, right? Like it's coincidental.
Yeah.
Or something.
Right. Well, I think that's the thing is like, when we're, sorry to interrupt, like when we're born, like we have access to that. We see it in children all the time. And they have we all have an intuitive sixth sense, right? And we are taught as we age to shut it down. Right? Like whether it's through religion, whether it's through science, I mean, whatever, whatever the culprit may be, it's just, and it usually comes from a place of fear, right? Because we want answers. We're not,
we want like a logical
as a culture, right?
Yeah.
We're not conditioned to like just accept the unexplainable.
Right.
Right.
Right. That's what I'm saying. Some things don't have a logical explanation. I'm like,
absolutely.
it just doesn't. Like, sorry, I don't know what to tell you. You know,
mean,
like,
right. Like, because like I could live in this space of anger. And I did in moments of like, why my mom? Why now? Why at this point?
Right.
Right. But you live in that. And then that you embody that. Like you get stuck. You get, if you're in this space of like, yeah. And there's no movement in that because there is no answer. There is no answer. And what I have come to peace and recognize in like this practice of like understanding my own spirituality and the energy around it is that like this lesson was mine to be learned so that I can teach about it.
Absolutely.
Right? Like this understanding. That is exactly why we're here. This understanding of law and it's not an understanding of it because I'm not an expert and I have such a rich compassion for it now because I know I'm not the only one. We all experience loss. Like it's life, right? And I think I just saw it was like a reel. I think it was this morning actually. It's like Anderson Cooper interviewing what's his name? He took over the night show.
Podcast. Jimmy Fallon.
Another late. My dad loves him. I can't think of his name. Robert Colbert.
Yeah.
Right? Is that his name? Steve Colbert.
We'll get there. Somebody. John Colbert.
And he was saying, he was like, you have to have gratitude even for the challenge, like for the shitty part of life, because that is like, you have to have gratitude for it, because if you don't, like, then there's no gratitude for any of it. Right? It's like the duality
you can't
of
have
life.
One without the other. Like you
can't have light without dark.
Exactly.
Yeah.
You cannot have the joy without sorrow,
Right. And I think it's like, that practice, you said something about a gratitude practice. And I was going to say, how do you exercise that? Like, is it just a mental thing? Do you write it down?
Yes, I write it down. So, I'm on just a visual.
Sorry, say that again.
I said I write it down.
Okay.
Because I'm a very visual person. So it helps me personally to see it. And I keep it in a notes app because I could go back to it. Like if I'm having a day where I'm not feeling grateful or just a rough day, or I'm having a block where I'm I want to be grateful, but I don't know what to say. And I can reference back to it. So that's part of my morning, meditate, or the gratitude practice. If I say gratitude practice after that. And it's been helpful, especially in the throes of grief. I mean, I'm 6 years out. It's gotten, quote, better. It's always up and down. But I think in the beginning, it really helped me to get out of that dark energy. There's nothing wrong with dark energy and the shadow side. We need to feel our emotions, right? I needed to feel my sadness. Absolutely. I needed to feel my anger. But I didn't want, to your point, I didn't want to harden myself and just sit there. I wanted to also come out and say, okay, how can I also be joyous and grateful for what I do have, even though I've lost something? It's been an amazing coping mechanism for sure.
Yeah. And that's that's part of the movement, right? The physical act of writing down is a movement, right? You're moving energy, you're moving your mental mind out of a space of potential negativity. You're, by presencing what we're grateful for. And it's I think part of my own spiritual practice has been, finding gratitude for this lesson that I've received, for this, and how, whether it's through my physical performance or teaching or being here with you, creating a podcast and talking about it and shifting the language around how we perceive loss.
Yes.
Is
still an energy movement.
Absolutely. It's the, in the loss, it's the gift that I've received. It's been because I can be then like a conduit to empower others to have this conversation.
Absolutely. Yeah, I immediately after my dad, in the year after, really year and a half, maybe 2 years after I lost him in 2017, it was like I was receiving something from above or wherever. I just had to write. Like, speaking of writing things down, I have a blog and I just was like writing about various things like related to losing him, but it was just like I had to get that energy out of me. It's like just interesting that you said the act of writing something down is a type of movement, So
Absolutely.
yeah.
I turned to painting. Like, I'm not a painter, and especially watercolor. Like, I was having these visions, and for me, like, where I had felt so safe and like pre my mom passing was in movement and was in dance, and I didn't feel safe in that space. And I was having these visions, and I was like, I need to get this out. And the only way I knew how, I was like, paintbrushes, watercolor, and created a series of paintings from it that I've included in performances, and that have inspired a body of work that I never truly anticipated.
Yeah.
And again, it's like that veil was lifted, right? Like, I had access to something that I didn't recognize before.
Yeah, it's like a flow. It's something just flowing through you almost. Like you're just a vessel for, I mean, it is you, but there's also something else in you that's like pushing the art out. Yes. Pushing the art out. Pushing, like for me, it was just like words.
We've talked a lot about spiritual movement, right?
Yep.
Right. And these, I did want to touch on real quick about, what these practices, like identifying like what these practices look like. And again, we've talked about how things are so intertwined, and two ways that like my spiritual practice has come to, that I use to get anchored in is mind gems from the body of work, Geotran, which is also part of like the energetic movement, because they're actual physical points on the body that restore the energy systems of the body. And so mind gems is one like specific practice that I do. Do you have anything on the spiritual side, as far as like, I know we talked about meditation and gratitude, that you really identify with on the spiritual side of like your practice?
I mean, just prayer. Besides meditation and a gratitude practice, I mean, prayer. Like this may sound insane and woo-woo, but like the night my dad passed, I was in Italy and I couldn't sleep. It was the middle of the night when I found out. And I went into my husband was like trying to sleep in the room. I went into the bathroom and just like, I got in the bathtub and was like praying. And when I tell you, I feel like people will be like, it's the night your dad died. Like, you should be angry. Like, you should feel like God isn't with you. And I felt like just having a conversation with him, with God, like I felt something there with me. Like, I was like, is God here? Is my dad here? There was something in that bathroom with me. So just having a dialogue with God, source, universe, like, to me, it's God, but praying and just like, whether it's to your point, verbalizing it, writing it down, thinking it, like, yeah, I mean, that's
awesome. That made me remember, my mom was reading, Jesus Calling, and it's a book kind of like of daily meditations. Journey to the Heart. Sorry, my dog is like all of a sudden sitting on my lap.
I love it.
recording at home.
Yes.
It is a spiritual
Get all
practice.
the extras. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh my God. For real. My dog's
Um,
snoring behind me, so I don't know if you can hear him or not. But.
no. Um, yeah. So like reading all of a sudden became like, reading, especially Jesus Calling. Um, and I read it as if like when I would read it, I would hear my mom's voice as if she were reading it to
I
me.
love that.
And
Ah, oh, I love that.
up until this point, like I had been like connected to like and identified like what my source is, and gotten to a place where I felt comfortable calling my source God again, and um and really using like my movement practice and yoga as like kind of my church, like my form of prayer, and like where I went to kind of lift that veil and feel that connection. And
And the breath,
when
I
I
think
was
the breath is also a connection, like during yoga,
yeah,
like your breath is a connection to
absolutely.
the spiritual. Yeah.
And I felt like when I was reading this these passages from Jesus Calling, I felt so connected to God and to my mom. Like it was like like a continuous like access point for, it's like, like we are, or at least I was taught that we're children of God, right? And the understanding that like God is within each of us. At least that's what I
Mm-hmm.
believe.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And really like allowing
Absolutely.
like
Holy
my
Spirit.
mom's, yeah, like allowing my mom's voice and presence to like live with me through the access point of God
Yes, absolutely.
became really, really powerful for me.
Yeah. Yeah. I totally agree. I think for me, there was a connection between, you call like, I mean, Christians call it like Heavenly Father. And I was like, I have an earthly father. And then I have like a heavenly father, God. And I remember a lot of times when I would be praying, kind of to your point, I felt like I was almost like talking to both of them. Like I was like, I have a heavenly father, I have an earthly father. And now they're like, I believe that they're like, those spirits are together. And I can almost like feel both of them when I would pray, and even still sometimes.
Mm,
And there's other people that
yeah.
have passed on. Like I lost my grandmother, who I was very close to, and yeah, it's become more like I do. It's like communing with God, but you also know you're communing with other spirits during prayer. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I love that.
And yeah, I was going to say the breath. Well, just like the physical connection, like a practice that's a spiritual practice or an energetic spiritual practice, but also a physical practice, like especially with meditating, which also sometimes becomes prayer for me. Just like touching my body and feeling my breath. Like yoga is connected to the breath, the poses are connected to the breath, but even just sitting there and like feeling, to me, like the breath almost is that like spirit within us. Like I'm like, it is like breathed into us. And it becomes almost like a religious practice. Like I can like feel my breath and I'm like, oh my God, I'm feeling like that source within me. I don't know. It
Yeah.
sounds really
Well, and
weird, but
like that is like the miracle of life, is it not? Like that we have these organs that keep us upright day to day, in and like day in and day out, and like, recognizing how easily we take for granted the simplicities of life, right? And how, I mean, it's not lucky. It's a gift, right? That we get to get up and we live these powerful organs in our bodies keep us moving and breathing and like, you know I remember the first time I heard this in yoga and laughed my ass off. It's like, well, if we're not breathing, we're dead. And it's like, oh shit.
Yeah. Oh yeah,
Yeah.
we did.
Right. Like, and then you get down to like, that simplicity of like that physical movement in your body. Like what am I trying to say here? Like that, the breath, like the, when you breathe, I'm like breathing to feel it in myself. It's like, it is life, right? Like that simple inhalation, like what you're breathing in is like yours. It's like your source of life, right? You're connected to, and then that connects us to others, right? And then when you're in a room moving with people, breathing succinctly, like it is, like there is a power in that, right? Whether it's just breathe or like, and then you bring song into it, like whether it's oming or in a church or like wherever you are and however you identify those things for yourself, like that is a gift. Hey, Beatrice. She's like, Mommy, I need you to breathe with me right now. The power went out.
Oh.
Yeah, I think that there was something there, and I feel like I'm getting a little.
Well, I think that's a good place for us to like lead into the next conversation around the physical, because the breath, I think the breath is both spiritual and physical. Like it's the one thing that really truly like connects us to both. And so we can like start the next physical discussion, starting with the breath and other ways we like have connected to our grief through the physical as well.
Yes, I love that. Thank you for joining the Morning Call podcast. Our intention is that you found a nugget of hope, inspiration, connection, or all of the above.
If you seek to dive deeper with the Morning Call community, email us, subscribe to our page, leave a review, and fill out our survey.
We want to hear your stories and widen the conversation to support and empower our grief experiences as we collectively become our true selves.
Find us and subscribe on all streaming platforms, YouTube, and at Morning Call Podcast on Instagram. You can also email us at morningcallpodcast@gmail.com.
This podcast was edited by Alexis Carrasquillo from Familia Creative Media.